What would you do if you woke up from a 15-month coma and found an HOA had built a public beach on your private lake? I drove home expecting quiet water and the life I'd almost lost. Instead, I found a metal gate where my old wooden one used to be, strangers laughing on my shoreline, and a sign claiming my lake belonged to an HOA I was never part of. Something was wrong the second my tires hit that dirt road. A pressure in the air, a feeling that someone had written me out of my own land. And the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. They never thought I'd come back. The gravel under my tires sounded different than I remembered, rougher, drier, like the land had aged faster than I had. 15 months is a long time to be gone, and even longer when you don't leave by choice. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as my old pickup crawled down the familiar dirt road, the one that used to ease something in my chest every time I turned onto it. Out here in the foothills of Wyoming, the wind always carried that clean bite of pine and dust, a smell that told me I was home long before I ever saw the cabin or the lake. But that morning, as the sun climbed over the ridge and spilled gold light across my property, something inside me stayed tense. I couldn't shake it. Maybe it was the silence in the cab. Maybe it was the way the breeze didn't feel like it used to. Or maybe it was just because 15 months of hospitals, fluorescent lights, and physical therapy rooms had rewired the way I breathed. It happens, they told me. You lose your sense of time. You lose your sense of place. You lose the thread of who you were before everything went dark. But as the last bend gave way to the long stretch that led to my lake, I felt the old rhythm return. The hum of the truck, the sway of the gravel road, the distant shimmer of water between the trees. I let out a slow breath. For the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, something felt right again. Solid. Mine. Then I saw it. My foot eased off the gas as a shape grew at the end of the road. At first, I thought the light was playing tricks on me. The old wooden gate I'd built myself, hand-cut posts, cedar crossbeam, the stain still dark and rich the day I went into the coma, was gone. In its place stood a tall steel barrier, powder-coated gray, bolted into the earth like it had sprouted there. Motion sensors, a keypad, even a security camera perched like an unblinking crow on the corner. My heart thudded once, then twice. Not fast, just heavy. I rolled to a stop a few feet from it. The sun hit the metal and threw a hard glare straight into my windshield. I had to shield my eyes just to see the sign bolted right in the center. Big letters, fresh paint, no hesitation in the message. Public Lake Access, Pine Ridge HOA. For a long moment, I didn't move. The engine idled, soft and uncertain, like the truck itself didn't know what to do next. My breath fogged faintly on the inside of the glass. I looked at the sign again, then at the gate, then at the land on both sides of it. The fence posts were new, too new. Pressure-treated pine, no knots, no weathering. Whoever built this hadn't done it last week. They'd done it while I was gone. Months ago, maybe even a year. I pushed open the door of the truck. The hinges squeaked, the same old sound, but the air that rushed in wasn't the same air I remembered. It carried something else. Voices, laughter, splashes of water slapping against the shore, the unmistakable sound of feet running across sand. Sand. There was no sand on my lake. Not naturally, anyway. The shoreline had always been reeds, cattails, dark soil, and cool stone. Wild and untouched, the way it's supposed to be out here. I stepped closer to the gate. My boots crunched the gravel, a sound that should have calmed me but instead just sharpened the edge inside my chest. Through the slats of the steel bars, I saw glints of color down by the water. Bright umbrellas, kayaks lined up like rental inventory, kids splashing where trout used to hide in the shallows. People, strangers, lounging in the very place I used to drink my morning coffee. A breath caught somewhere in my ribs. 15 months. That's all it took for a private lake to turn into a weekend attraction. And all of it. Without me. The wind picked up, slipping through the gaps in the metal bars, carrying the faint smell of grilled food and sunscreen. It felt wrong. So wrong it prickled the back of my neck. My lake never smelled like that. My lake smelled like wet earth, cool water, pine, and honesty. I lay my hand on the gate. The metal was warm from the sun, smooth, almost arrogant. There was a time when this road didn't need a gate. The land itself set the boundary. But this wasn't a boundary. This was a takeover. My thumb brushed over a small metal plate welded near the keypad. It bore the HOA logo, 3 little pine trees, and a swooping line meant to represent the lake. They'd branded it. Branded my property. A low, steady anger gathered in my chest. Not hot or explosive, just dense and quiet. The way anger feels when a man has already lost too much to waste energy shouting. The kind of anger that comes from betrayal. Not by a person, but by a system that thinks paperwork can replace truth. Behind me, my truck beeped softly, reminding me I'd left the door open. I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at a gate that shouldn't exist, listening to strangers enjoy a lake they had no right to touch, feeling the land beneath my boots, the same land I'd built a life on, pull away like a horse spooked by an unfamiliar scent. I closed my eyes. For a brief second, I pictured the cabin, my cabin, just beyond the tree line, the porch I rebuilt, the cedar beams I sanded, the quiet mornings that held me together when the world felt too loud. Then I opened my eyes again, and all I saw was that sign. Public Lake Access, Pine Ridge, HOA. The breeze shifted, carrying another ripple of laughter from the shoreline. High, carefree, oblivious, my jaw tightened. How could they look at this land, my lake, and decide it was theirs to open to the public? What gave them the right? What let them believe they could rewrite ownership with a few sheets of paper and a bolt cutter? The wind died down. For a moment, the whole world felt still. Not peaceful, just waiting. Like the land itself was holding its breath, watching to see what I'd do. I rested both hands on the gate, leaning into the metal just enough to feel the resistance. Solid, confident, uninvited. 15 months gone. A lifetime changed. And now this. Why did the HOA believe they could turn my private lake into public access? I didn't know, but I knew I was going to find out. I stayed there a moment longer, hands still resting on the metal gate, feeling the cold steel sink into my palms. Then I stepped back, breathed in the pine-tinged air, and let my eyes drift past the tree line toward the water I could no longer see. My lake. My refuge. The wind shifted again, bringing with it the faint smell of sunscreen and hot dogs, 2 things that had never belonged anywhere near my shoreline. I turned away from the gate and walked slowly back to the truck. Gravel crunched under my boots, same as always, but the sound didn't comfort me the way it used to. It echoed, hollow, like the land itself was trying to tell me something I should have heard earlier. I sat in the driver's seat without closing the door. The creak of the hinges hung in the air. For a long moment, I just stared at the road ahead. A tunnel of pines, sunlight filtering through in broken stripes, dust drifting across in slow motion. It reminded me of the day I first found this place, a day when the world was quieter, and I was a different man. Back then, I'd been tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. 2 decades working on flood control systems, reservoir repairs, dam stability reports. Every project fought through budgets and committees. I'd built structures meant to tame water, only to watch politics unravel them. By the time I left Denver, My soul felt sanded down like an overused workbench. I remembered that drive. Mile after mile of highway falling away behind me until the land opened up into rolling hills and long, untouched stretches of forest. I'd pulled off on a whim down an unmarked dirt path, and there it was, a quiet lake with water so still it looked like a sheet of glass. No docks, no houses, no footprints. Just reeds whispering against the bank and a family of deer drinking at the far end. The cabin that sat nearby was in rough shape, leaning chimney, sagging porch, but the bones were honest. I'd stepped out of my truck, listened to the silence, and felt something settle in my chest for the first time in years. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't convenient. But it was mine. I rebuilt the cabin with my own hands. Every beam, every board, every rail on that porch had passed through my grip. I cut trenches to guide rainwater away from the foundation. I shaped the bank to prevent erosion. I rigged a simple spillway system, quiet, reliable, invisible to anyone who didn't know water the way I did. The lake was never just water to me. It was peace, earned peace, and for a long while it stayed that way. Until the first time I met Bethany Reed. I didn't hear her approach, not over the sound of the shovel biting into dirt as I deepened a filtration run along the western edge. It was mid-afternoon, the sun warm but not brutal, and I'd fallen into that good kind of rhythm where thoughts drift and work feels like meditation. Then a shadow stretched across the trench. I looked up to find a woman in a cream-colored pantsuit standing on the bank like she'd stepped straight out of a real estate brochure. Silver blonde hair, precise posture, clipboard tucked under her arm. The kind of person who didn't sweat, didn't bend, didn't belong anywhere near mud. "Mr. Cole?" she asked, voice crisp, like she was reading the name off a complaint form. I blinked up at her. "That's me. I'm Bethany Reed, president of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association." I kept my voice polite, the same polite tone you'd use with a tax auditor or someone inspecting your chimney for insurance. "I appreciate the introduction," I said, wiping dirt from my gloves, "but I'm not part of your HOA." Her smile never faltered, though it never touched her eyes either. "We noticed, but given that your parcel borders our community, we thought it best to establish a relationship. Sometimes properties fall within what we call a historic watershed overlay." I'd spent 20 years working around watersheds. I knew overlays better than she knew her own coffee order. "This lake isn't inside any community boundary," I said. "It's private. Always has been." She tilted her head, studying the water behind me as if she were appraising it. "Still," she murmured, "we like to maintain a sense of unity around here. A shared environment." I nodded once. "Sounds nice?" Then I put my shovel back into the dirt. She waited, hovering like a mosquito that hadn't decided where to bite. Eventually, she turned and walked off, her shoes somehow avoiding every root and patch of mud. I didn't think much of it then. HOA presidents tend to buzz around places they don't own, looking for things to classify, regulate, or improve. I figured she was just curious, maybe envious, but nothing more. I should have noticed the way she lingered on the lake, though. The way her eyes followed the shoreline, not like someone admiring nature, but like someone measuring it. At the time, I brushed it off. The world felt simple back then. I had work to do, a cabin to finish, a lake to protect, and quiet mornings that made sense. But looking back, that was the first shift, the first ripple across smooth water. The second came weeks later when I spotted a drone dipping low over the tree line. High-end model, steady hover, a camera capable of reading the date on a wristwatch from 100 feet. I waved it off. Figured some kid from Pine Ridge was just playing pilot. Then came the SUV. Black, tinted windows, creeping along the fence line like it was hunting for something. No plates I recognized. No reason to be there. Then a man I didn't know, clipboard in one hand, GPS tool in the other, stood exactly where my property line met the grove of oaks. He said something about boundary verifications, then sprinted away when I pressed him. Still, I didn't connect the dots. I told myself it was nothing. A drone here, a stranger there. SUVs come and go. I didn't realize these were warnings. Not loud ones. Just soft, subtle shifts, like the lake talking before a storm. And now, standing in front of a steel gate I never approved, hearing strangers splash in water that once mirrored the sky in perfect stillness, I finally understood what those warnings were trying to say. Bethany hadn't been curious the day she watched me dig that trench. She'd been calculating, assessing, wanting. And if there's one thing I've learned after a lifetime working around water, it's that small changes become big ones when no one's paying attention. The quiet before the flood always feels harmless until it's too late. I closed the truck door gently, letting the latch click into place. Then I rested my hands on the wheel and stared straight ahead at the shimmering sliver of lake through the trees. The wind stirred again, brushing across my cheek like a whisper. They didn't just see the lake as water. They saw opportunity. But why? And how far had they already gone while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed, unable to speak, unable to defend the land I had poured my life into? The laughter drifting from the shoreline answered nothing. It only tightened the question. What did Pine Ridge HOA see in my lake that made them bold enough to claim it? I put the truck in gear and eased away from the gate, dust curling up behind my tires as I backed onto the main dirt road. I didn't have a plan, but I knew I needed answers from someone who had actually been here. Someone who had watched this slow-moving storm roll across my land while I was gone. The road dipped toward the fence line that separated my property from the Hale Ranch, and as I rounded the bend, I saw a familiar figure standing beside a weathered post, hands braced on his hips, watching my truck like he'd been expecting me the whole time. Marcus Hale. He was older than I remembered. Maybe not older, but worn in a way that only comes from worry. His hat was pulled low against the afternoon sun, and the wind pushed at his flannel shirt like it was trying to move him down the road. When I came to a stop beside him, he didn't wave, didn't smile. He just stared at me with an expression somewhere between relief and disbelief. "Well," he finally said. "Damn, Remy. I wasn't sure I'd ever see you drive this road again." I wasn't sure either, I admitted, stepping out of the truck. My boots hit the dirt with a soft thud that felt heavier than it should have. "Things look different," he snorted. "That's one way to say it." Marcus glanced past me toward the treetops where the lake lay hidden. Even from here, faint echoes carried on the wind, voices splashing, the kind of noise that didn't belong on private land. Marcus's jaw tightened. "You seen your gate?" he asked. "I saw it." "And the sign?" "I saw that too." He nodded once, slow, like each motion required its own thought. "I figured you might come by. I was hoping you would." He leaned against the fence post. "Things got strange after your accident." A gust of wind stirred the dust between us, carrying the metallic scent of approaching rain. I folded my arms and waited. Marcus took off his hat, ran a hand through his graying hair, then put it back on as if bracing himself. "First couple weeks after you went missing, everything was quiet. Folks in town didn't know what to think. Word was you'd wrecked somewhere out near the creek, but nobody could find you." "I know," I said quietly. "I was a John Doe in a hospital for weeks." He nodded again. "Yeah. Well, HOA folks didn't wait for answers." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean they didn't wait?" "I mean," he said, "they started sniffing around your land like coyotes around a calf that's fallen behind the herd." I frowned. "Who?" "Bethany. Her board. and some folks I didn't recognize. His voice dropped lower. First time I saw something odd was that drone. Spooked my horses. Thing dipped down so low I could see the camera pivot. Came straight from the Pine Ridge direction. I saw it before the accident, I said. Thought it was nothing. Marcus let out a humorless laugh. That's how it starts. First the drone, then the SUV. I felt the pinch behind my ribs again. You saw it too? Oh yeah. Black one with tinted windows. Sat there on the shoulder of your road for a good half-hour one afternoon. Engine idling. Didn't move until I started walking toward it. Who was inside? Couldn't tell. Windows were dark as pitch. The air felt colder suddenly, though the sun was still high. Marcus continued. A week later, I caught a man at your west fence line, wearing hiking boots and carrying a clipboard. Acted jumpy as a jackrabbit. Said he was doing a soil assessment for the county. County doesn't do soil assessments at property edges, I said. That's what I told him, Marcus replied. And guess what? He bolted. Ran straight for the trees like someone blew a whistle only he could hear. Something inside me sank. Not fear, recognition. The same puzzle pieces I'd ignored were now sliding into place, one by one. I leaned against the truck bed. Marcus, what else happened while I was gone? He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. The worst part hadn't been said yet. Remy, he began, choosing each word carefully. After about 2 months, HOA put out a notice saying your land was unmanaged and posed a potential safety hazard. It started small, mailers, little signs staked near your road. I exhaled sharply. I wasn't dead. I was in a hospital bed. He shook his head. People don't read details. They read headlines, and Pine Ridge prints them real pretty. Wind rustled the dry grass between us. Then, he continued, 3 months in, they brought in contractors, big trucks, portable fencing, survey equipment. They blocked your drive for a whole day while they hauled materials in. My jaw clenched. And no one stopped them? Sheriff came by once, he said. Bethany showed him a folder with official-looking papers. I didn't see inside, but whatever she flashed made him step back. He met my eyes, voice low. They said they were maintaining community shoreline. That's how they worded it. Like your lake was part of their HOA. My pulse thudded in my ears. A mix of disbelief and anger rose through me, cold and steady. Marcus looked away toward the ridge. I tried, Remy. I really did. Called the county twice, filed concerns, but they said everything looked legitimate in the system. Some kind of temporary stewardship authorization. My breath caught. Stewardship? Yes. He kicked at a rock with the toe of his boot. That's the word they used. Stewardship of abandoned or unclaimed property. My throat tightened. I never abandoned anything. I know. The wind picked up again, pushing dust across the road and rustling the tops of the pines. Marcus's voice softened. Remy, someone had to file papers for that status to even exist. It ain't automatic. Someone had to make sure your land was classified as unattended. Someone used your absence. The words hit harder than I expected. They weren't loud or dramatic, just factual, and that made them dangerous. I looked toward the lake, though I couldn't see it from here. Only treetops and the faintest shimmer of sky reflected off distant water. Who signed for me? I asked quietly. Marcus exhaled slowly. I never saw a name, but there was a man, short dark hair, ball cap, drove a contractor truck with no markings, tattoo around his wrist, black, sharp-looking thing. My breath stalled. I knew exactly who he meant. The same man I had confronted months before the accident. The same man I saw at my property line with a clipboard. the same silhouette I recognized in the split second before the crash. I swallowed hard. "Marcus, did anyone else see him?" "Maybe," he said. "But folks in Pine Ridge don't like talking when HOA's involved. They keep their heads down." I stood there, the wind cooling the sweat on my neck, the sound of laughter drifting faintly across the trees. My lake, my land, my work. Taken while I lay silent in a hospital, unable to fight back, a shadow crossed the ground as a bird flew overhead, gliding toward the water. For a moment, everything felt eerily still. Marcus leaned closer. "Remy, I know this land means something deeper to you, but what they did..." He shook his head. "It wasn't just bold. It wasn't just wrong." He paused. "It was planned." The words lingered in the air like the first rumble of distant thunder. I felt something shift inside me. Not panic, not fear. Something colder, more focused. The feeling a man gets when the world draws a line in the dirt and dares him to step over it. If Pine Ridge HOA had planned this while I wasn't there, if they had used my silence as permission, if someone forged a path into the county system to make it possible, then this wasn't an accident, and it sure as hell wasn't a misunderstanding. I looked at the road leading back to the lake, the steel gate, the laughter of strangers, the sign claiming my water. I straightened my shoulders. "Marcus," I said, voice steady, "I'm going to find out who did this." He nodded once. "I know you will." I got back into my truck, the seat creaking as I settled behind the wheel. The air smelled like dust and pine and something else, something unsettled, something waiting. As I turned the ignition, the engine rumbled to life, old but dependable. My eyes drifted once more toward the hidden glimmer of water through the trees. Someone had taken what wasn't theirs. Someone had written my absence into their advantage. Someone had counted on me never coming back. They'd been wrong. I drove back toward the lake with a harder grip on the wheel than before. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dirt road, turning every pine trunk into a dark silhouette. The wind had picked up too, carrying that familiar smell of water. But this time it mixed with sunscreen, charcoal smoke, and the chatter of strangers who had no idea they were standing on land bought, tended, and lived on by a man who'd nearly died. When the tree line opened and my cabin came into view, I slowed the truck to a crawl. My breath caught. The cabin looked the same in shape, but not in spirit. The wood siding I'd stained by hand was now covered with cheap beige paint, the kind realtors use to make houses neutral. Vinyl had been wrapped around the posts where my cedar beams used to stand. Even from a distance, I saw the shine of it, plastic trying to imitate wood. My swing was gone, my porch rails replaced. My home turned into something that didn't know me anymore. I climbed out of the truck and walked toward the porch steps. Gravel shifted under my boots, but the rhythm felt off. I reached the door and looked through the window, cupping my hands around my eyes to cut the glare. The inside was unrecognizable. My shelves empty. My furniture replaced with bland rental pieces. The framed photo I'd kept of my father teaching me how to handle a level, gone. But what stopped my breath entirely was a framed picture on the mantel. A smiling couple I'd never seen in my life, staged like they belonged there, like they owned the place. I stepped back, heat rising behind my ribs, and that's when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A black SUV rolled toward the cabin with unsettling confidence. Windows tinted, paint polished, the kind of vehicle that wants you to know it's official even when it's not. It stopped so close I could feel the engine's hum against the ground. The back door opened first. Out stepped Bethany Reed, dressed like she was heading to a board meeting instead of trespassing on a man's private ranch. Navy suit, tight bun, clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a shield. Two security men climbed out after her, matching polo shirts with Pine Ridge HOA security stitched on the sleeves. Not deputies, not licensed. Just big men wearing badges no state had approved. Bethany walked toward me with small, sure steps, each one clicking on the gravel like punctuation marks. When she finally stopped in front of me, she tilted her head with that poised, calculated smile I remembered from the day she first approached me at the lake. "Can I help you?" she asked. The absurdity of that question nearly made me laugh. "You can start," I said, "by explaining what happened to my house." She blinked once, slowly. "Your house?" Her tone was polite, controlled. "Sir, this residence is under the stewardship of Pine Ridge HOA. The previous owner passed away last year." I stared at her. "I didn't pass away." She tapped her clipboard. "According to our records, Mr. Cole is deceased. The property was abandoned and subsequently incorporated into community-managed land." I stepped closer, my shadow overlapping hers. "Look at me. Do I look deceased?" One of the security men shifted his stance. The other rested his hand casually near the radio on his belt. They weren't nervous. They were rehearsed. Bethany didn't flinch. "Sir, you are currently trespassing. If you don't vacate the area, we will contact law enforcement." The wind pushed through the pines, rustling needles like distant whispers. My jaw tightened. "This is my land," I said quietly. "My cabin. My lake." "Your alleged cabin," she corrected. I felt something cold settle in my chest, the kind of cold that made a man choose his words carefully, because anger alone wouldn't win this fight. Logic and truth would. Bethany lifted her radio and spoke calmly into it. "Unit 3, be prepared. We may require county support at the Cole parcel." I almost couldn't believe it. They were calling the sheriff on me for standing on my own porch. Minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser rolled into view, tires crunching on gravel, lights off but purposeful. Two deputies stepped out. The older one, broad, gray at the temples, approached with wary professionalism. "Afternoon," he said. "What seems to be the issue?" Bethany gestured toward me with a measured sweep of her hand. "Deputy Norris, thank you for coming. This man was found trespassing on HOA-managed property. He refused to leave." Norris looked at me. "Sir, your name?" "Remy Cole." He blinked. "Do you have identification?" I exhaled. Everything I had was destroyed in the accident. My wallet, my license, gone. He shifted uncomfortably. "Any documentation proving you live here?" "I built half this place myself," I said. "My name is in the county registry." Before Norris could answer, Bethany stepped forward, voice sweet as vinegar. "We submitted updated stewardship paperwork last year. His name is no longer associated with this parcel." The deputy scanned her clipboard, his brows knitting. "There's a provisional death notice on file." He looked up at me. "It states that you died in a vehicle accident 15 months ago." The words hit harder than any fall I'd taken in my life. I stepped closer to him. "That notice is wrong. I was in a coma." Bethany folded her arms. "Deputy, this is exactly why we needed assistance. This gentleman is impersonating a deceased property owner." My voice dropped into something low and sharp. "You know I'm alive." She didn't blink. "I know what the papers say." Deputy Norris sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Listen, Mr. Cole. Until we verify ownership with the county, I'm required to ask you to leave the premises." "So you're telling me," I said slowly, "that while I was lying in a hospital bed fighting to stay alive, someone filed paperwork claiming my land?" He didn't answer, and his silence was louder than any explanation. The younger deputy stepped forward. "Sir, we need you to vacate now." The wind pushed a curtain of dust across the ground as I looked from the deputies to the cabin I'd rebuilt, to the lake glimmering like nothing had changed. For a heartbeat, I felt myself split in two, anger in one hand, heartbreak in the other. Then something inside me steadied. I lifted my backpack from the porch rail. My voice was controlled, almost calm. "Fine, I'll go." Bethany allowed herself a victorious smile. But as I stepped past her, I paused. "Listen carefully," I said quietly enough that only she and the deputies could hear. "I'm not finished, not by a long shot." For the first time, her expression slipped. A tiny flicker, fear or maybe recognition that the storm she'd counted on staying dead had just come back to life. I walked down the steps and toward my truck, the sky turning a deeper shade of gold behind the ridge. The air tasted different now, not like defeat, but like purpose sharpening. Someone had stolen my land with paperwork. I intended to take it back with truth. When I pulled away from the cabin, the gravel spit beneath the tires, rising into the rearview mirror like smoke drifting from something left smoldering behind me. The road wound through the pines in familiar curves, but nothing felt familiar anymore. Not the light, not the quiet, not the way the wind slid through the branches. Everything felt paused, waiting, watching. The kind of silence that sits heavy on a man's shoulders, reminding him that the next step has to be deliberate, clean, precise. By the time I reached the open stretch overlooking the lake, the sun was sinking low, laying a copper sheen across the water, my water, where umbrellas and rental kayaks broke the reflection. I slowed the truck, letting it idle as I stared down at the scene. Families laughing, feet splashing, coolers dragged across soil I once protected like a living thing. There was no anger clawing at me now, just a cold, steady clarity. Truth doesn't shout, it waits. And then it arrives with paperwork sharper than any blade. I shifted into gear and kept driving. The Pine Ridge community disappeared in the rear view as I headed toward town. A small cluster of old brick buildings stitched together by two-lane roads and dust that never quite settled. The mountains framed the horizon like old guardians watching over everything quietly, patiently, unbothered by whoever claimed to manage a lake they'd seen long before a subdivision ever existed. Town looked mostly the same. The diner still flickered with its old neon sign. The ranch supply store still had its porch stacked with feed sacks and cracked salt blocks. Folks outside nodded when they saw me. Long, steady looks, the kind small towns give a man they believed was gone. I pulled into a gravel lot near a faded brown building with a simple wooden sign. Mitchell and Cumberboom, land and water rights. I sat there a moment, hands on the wheel, letting the engine tick warm metal into cool air. My heartbeat steadied. The night air crept through my half-open window, carrying the scent of rain-soaked dirt even though no rain had fallen. Wyoming had a way of doing that, giving you signs before storms. I stepped out. The gravel shifted under my boots, each step sounding louder than it should have. Inside, the small lobby smelled faintly of old paper, pine cleaner, and the kind of coffee that had been reheated too many times. Soft lamplight warmed the walls lined with framed maps, river flows, water tables, boundary lines etched in ink that carried more weight in this state than any HOA charter ever could. Behind the front desk sat Sarah Mitchell, reading glasses perched on her head, papers spread out like a battlefield in front of her. She looked up when the door chimed, and for a second, her expression froze, surprised, then softened by recognition. "Well," she said, setting down her pen, "I heard you were back. Didn't expect you this soon." I nodded. "Didn't expect to need a lawyer this soon." "Most people don't," she replied, motioning me toward a chair. "But you're not most people. You're Remy Cole, the man who's got half this county convinced he turned into a ghost." I managed a small smile, but the weight behind my ribs didn't lift. I wish being a ghost could get my land back. She leaned forward, elbows resting on the desk. Tell me what happened. I told her everything, slowly at first, then with the momentum of a dam finally cracking open. The gate, the sign, the strangers on my shoreline. The cabin turned into a rental staging area. The death notice, the sheriff's face when the papers confirmed I was gone. Sarah didn't interrupt once, didn't blink, didn't scribble unnecessary notes. She just listened, eyes sharp and steady, her breath measured, like someone trained to read the truth by the spaces between words. When I finished, the room felt heavier, the maps on the walls suddenly carrying more meaning than before. Remy, she said slowly, leaning back, this wasn't an accident. Someone moved fast, too fast, to classify your land as abandoned. Temporary stewardship like that doesn't happen unless someone files paperwork, pushes it through, and makes sure no one questions it. I figured as much. And the timing? She continued. Right when you were in a coma? Right when no one could challenge it? Her voice dropped. Someone knew you were vulnerable. The air in the office felt colder suddenly. I wasn't sure if it was the temperature or the truth settling into place. Sarah opened a drawer and pulled out a thick statute book. Wyoming Land and Water Code, edges worn from use. She flipped through it with practiced ease until she found the section she wanted. Listen, she said, tapping the page. Temporary stewardship doesn't transfer ownership. It doesn't grant expansion rights. And it sure as hell doesn't let an HOA build structures on private land. They overstepped, dramatically. A slow breath left my lungs. Not relief, just the acknowledgement of a path forming. Sarah stood, moved to a tall file cabinet, and began pulling out forms. County request sheets, archival deed retrievals, water rights verification slips. She laid them out one by one like tools laid across a workbench. First step, she said, we prove you're alive in the eyes of the county. I'm standing right here, I said. Paperwork doesn't see people, she replied. It sees signatures and dates, so that's what we'll give it. She paused, then leaned against the desk, arms crossed. Second step, we look at exactly when Pine Ridge HOA filed their stewardship claim. You said the sheriff saw documents when he came to your cabin? Yes. Good. That means those documents exist in the formal system. And if the date of submission overlaps with your Coma window, then someone exploited it, I finished. Knowingly. Her eyes met mine, steady as stone. Exactly. The rain-like smell in the air deepened. The quiet outside felt thick enough to touch. So what now? I asked. Now, she said, gathering the stack of forms into a neat pile, you sign a representation letter. We get medical records proving your condition during the so-called abandonment period. Then we file for immediate review of all HOA claims, starting with that provisional death notice. A strange relief slid through me, not light, but solid, like stepping onto firm ground after walking on ice. And Remy? She added, softer this time. The amount of construction they've done. The beach sand. The structures. They couldn't have done that without assuming no one would come back to question it. My jaw tensed. They assumed wrong. Sarah handed me a pen. Let's put that in writing. I signed. The ink felt heavier than it should have, like each stroke rewrote a piece of the last 15 months. When I stepped back outside, the sky had darkened into deep blue, the first stars peeking through above the ridge. The air was cooler now, the wind sharper, carrying something quiet but determined. The lake was miles behind me, but I could still feel it, like a pulse in the land, a memory waiting to be restored. Someone had buried my identity in paperwork. Someone had claimed my land under the cover of silence, and someone thought that silence would last forever. But silence is just the breath before the truth speaks, and tonight, That truth finally had a path back home. The next morning broke cold and pale, the kind of Wyoming light that slides across the land without warmth, revealing everything without apology. I woke before sunrise in the small motel room on the edge of town, the stale scent of old carpet and machine-made waffles lingering in the air. Sleep hadn't done much. My body rested, but my mind hadn't settled even for a minute. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the heater rattle behind the wall. 15 months away from my land. 15 months where my name slipped through the cracks of a system I used to trust. Today was the day I stepped back into that system, on purpose. I grabbed my jacket, slipped the documents Sarah gave me into the inner pocket, and stepped outside. The morning air slapped me awake. Cold, biting, clean. The horizon blushed with a thin streak of orange as the sun tried to climb up over the distant ridge. My breath fogged as I walked to the truck. Dew clung to the windshield like a thin coat of frost. Driving into town felt different today. More focused, more pointed. The road wasn't just dirt and gravel. It was the narrow line between what had been stolen and what I intended to reclaim. The county clerk's office sat in a low brick building across from the courthouse, the flag outside barely catching the morning breeze. I pushed through the glass doors, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights greeting me like an old, unwelcome acquaintance. Inside, everything had that familiar government tone. Yellowed papers pinned to corkboards, outdated posters on the walls, slow printers humming behind a desk where a woman with cat-eye glasses typed steadily. Her gray hair was coiled neatly behind her head, and the nameplate read M. Sanders. She glanced up when I approached. "Morning," she said with practiced politeness. "How can I help you?" "I need property records for the coal parcel," I said, "and I need to see the stewardship filings attached to it." Her fingers froze above the keyboard for a fraction of a second. So small most people wouldn't catch it. But I did. It was the kind of pause that meant she had seen that name before. Recently. Maybe often. "Coal? As in Remy Coal?" "Yes." She hesitated again. Longer this time. "Do you have identification, sir?" "My identification was destroyed when I crashed," I replied. "But I have legal representation. My attorney is Sarah Mitchell." That name changed something. Her shoulders loosened a bit. Her gaze sharpened with something, maybe curiosity, maybe caution. "Well," she said, "let me pull up the file." She turned to her monitor and began typing. The screen's glow reflected off her glasses as she clicked through tabs. Her brows pulled together almost immediately. "That's strange." "What?" I leaned slightly forward. "These records were updated." She clicked again, scrolling, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Stewardship authorization," she murmured under her breath. "Filed 14 months ago, approved provisionally." "By whom?" She shook her head. "This file is restricted. Certain portions are sealed." A slow burn tightened in my chest. County clerks don't seal routine paperwork. Someone had requested that restriction manually. "Can you at least show me the main entries?" I asked. She swallowed, then turned the monitor slightly. Not enough to break policy, but enough to give me a glimpse. My own name sat in the field labeled Previous Owner, Deceased. The date beside it lined up exactly with the second month of my coma. My voice felt like gravel in my throat. "That's false." She lowered her voice, suddenly careful. "Mr. Cole, I believe you. I truly do, but these filings, someone pushed them through with unusual speed. Signatures, vague. Affidavit wording, odd." Her eyes darted toward a back office door. "Can I get copies?" She bit her lip. "I shouldn't. These aren't standard public documents." I didn't look away. "Then what can you give me?" For a moment, she said nothing. Only the hum of ceiling lights filled the room. Then she drew a slow breath and clicked another tab. "I shouldn't do this," she whispered. "But that HOA has been persistent. Too persistent." She printed a single sheet, just one, and slid it across the counter with her hand halfway covering it. "This isn't the full file, but it's a page that wasn't sealed." I lifted it. An affidavit. A death report. Not official, not complete, not accurate, and signed. Not by a coroner, not by a doctor, but by a licensed community liaison named D. Pierce. A cold pressure gathered behind my ribs. The man with the tattoo. The man at my fence line. The man near my accident site. He hadn't just scouted my land. He'd signed me dead on paper. My heartbeat felt slow and heavy as I folded the page and tucked it into my jacket. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You didn't have to do this." Her eyes darted around the empty office. "Be careful, Mr. Cole. If someone pushed this through, they won't want it undone." I nodded, stepped back, and left the office. Outside, the sun had risen fully now, spilling a bright wash of light over the courthouse steps, and the flag snapping in a sharper wind. My boots thudded against the concrete as I crossed the parking lot. The truth was no longer a question. It was a thread, thin, fragile, but real, and I had hold of it. I climbed into my truck and pulled the paper out again, staring at the signature at the bottom. Someone had taken my name off my own deed. Someone had filed my death with a stroke of a pen. Someone had expected me to stay gone forever. But paper doesn't forget. Not when you know what to look for. Not when you know how to follow it back to the hand that wrote the lie. I folded the page carefully, slid it back into my jacket, and started the engine. The rumble filled the morning air, steady and familiar. The road ahead wasn't just a road anymore. It was the path back to my land, my lake, and the truth someone had tried very hard to bury. And this time, I wasn't walking it alone. By the time I got back to Sarah's office, the sun had climbed high enough to burn the morning chill off the sidewalks. The little brass bell above her door jingled when I stepped inside, and she looked up from a stack of documents as if she already knew I had something heavy in my pocket. "You found something," she said. I nodded and placed the folded sheet on her desk. The moment her eyes reached the signature at the bottom, she inhaled sharply. Not dramatic, just enough for me to catch it. "Pierce," she murmured. "This again." "You know him?" "Contractor," she said, sliding the paper closer and adjusting her glasses. "No official company branding, but he shows up on multiple inspection jobs around Pine Ridge. Too many." My pulse beat slower, heavier. "He's the one who signed me dead." She didn't argue. She didn't soften it. She didn't pretend the paperwork wasn't damning. Instead, she reached for a large binder on the corner of her desk, a thick, leather-bound thing with worn edges and a brass latch. She flipped it open, revealing an array of records: land surveys, water maps, historical overlays, environmental reports. "Remy," she said, "I need you to look at this." She turned a page, revealing a detailed hydrological map, complete with contour lines, depth measurements, and notes scribbled in the margins in a handwriting I knew better than my own. My handwriting. I stepped closer. My fingers brushed the edge of the page. "This is mine. This is... When I worked for the state, we mapped sections of this watershed. And this," she said, tapping the map with her pen, "is the nail in the coffin for Pine Ridge. Your lake isn't just private. It's classified under a protective hydrological buffer, which means any construction within 50 feet of the shoreline is illegal without state review." I exhaled slowly. The beach, the docks, the structures. All violations. Her voice hardened. "And if Pierce filed paperwork claiming you were gone, That means the HOA knowingly built on protected land without permission. They didn't just overstep, they committed environmental fraud. The room felt warmer suddenly, like the radiator had kicked on, though I knew it hadn't. Something inside me, the cold, coiled patience I'd carried since leaving the hospital, shifted. Not anger, not relief, not even satisfaction, just certainty, the kind that settles deep, like stone under the soil. Sarah flipped another page, revealing a scanned document, old, grainy but unmistakable, a state approval form, signed by me nearly 20 years ago, certifying the lake as a controlled overflow basin. This, she said, her voice lower now, is what they didn't expect. They thought you were just a rancher with a piece of water and no leverage. What they didn't know is that you're the man who helped design half the watershed infrastructure in this county. I let out a slow breath, almost a laugh. And they built a beach on a controlled basin? She nodded. Sand and retaining walls restrict natural water flow. If runoff from the ridge hits this wrong, and it always does in spring, everything they built becomes a liability. Then they're not just trespassing on my land, I said. They're endangering their own community. Sarah closed the binder gently, as if sealing the truth inside. Exactly. We stood in silence for a beat. The air outside shifted, rattling the window slightly. Dust from the street stirred in a passing gust. Then Sarah stepped to another cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She laid it on the desk. I've been watching Pine Ridge for a while, she said. Too many boundary questions. Too many permits pushed through after hours. But this, your case, is the one that connects everything. What's in the envelope? Proof of prior violations. Not enough on their own to make a case, but combined with your hydrological records. She tapped the binder again. We have leverage. I pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down. The wood creaked beneath me, grounding me, bringing me back to the feeling of the cabin porch under my boots. So what do we do now? Sarah sat too, folding her hands. We go to the State Environmental Board. We request an emergency inspection. We get them on record. And once the state sees unauthorized beach construction on a protected basin, her eyes sparked. HOA loses jurisdiction. Pierce loses credibility. And we start pulling apart every lie they've written. The wind outside howled against the building, a sudden burst, like the world itself approving the plan. But then her expression shifted, more serious, more calculating. Remy, there's something else. She opened a drawer and pulled out a slim folder. Inside was a single photo. Grainy, zoomed in, a drone shot, judging by the angle. It showed the western shoreline of my lake. On it, a structure I hadn't seen yesterday, a small shack, or maybe a shed, built partially into the bank. Wooden, new, windows dark. What is that? I asked. That, Sarah said, is not part of any public use plan. It wasn't there 6 months ago. It isn't listed on permits. And the materials match contractor builds associated with him. Pierce, she nodded. They built something on your land they don't want listed. Something they built fast. My jaw tightened. What the hell would they hide on my shoreline? I don't know, she said, but whatever it is, it was built after your death notice was filed, and it's not meant for families and kayaks. The air in the office seemed to still, like even the dust motes held their breath. I rose from the chair. I need to see it. Sarah shook her head. Not yet, not alone, not until we have state support. I can handle myself. This isn't about handling yourself, she snapped. Not unkindly, but firmly. This is about not giving them exactly what they want. I froze. Meaning what? Meaning, she said, lowering her voice, if they filed fraud once, They might be willing to claim trespassing again. Or worse, say you were threatening them. You need witnesses, documentation, legal footing. I took a slow breath, forcing the tension in my shoulders to settle. She was right. Charging in alone would only feed Bethany's narrative. So what's the next move? I asked. Sarah stood and handed me the hydrological map, the one with my own handwriting across the margins. Tonight, you go home. Rest. Tomorrow, we file the emergency review. The map felt heavier than paper. More like a key to a door someone had tried to weld shut. And Remy, she added quietly, whatever they built on your lake, it's connected. Pierce didn't sign your death notice for nothing. Outside, a harsh gust shook the window pane again. The sky had gone gray, clouds stacking over the ridge like a storm preparing to drop. Truth had finally surfaced, and it carried a name the HOA never expected. My name. By the time Sarah and I pulled into the Pine Ridge Community Lodge, the storm clouds had thickened into a dark sheet over the valley. The building sat on a small rise overlooking the subdivision, the kind of overbuilt lodge that looked impressive in brochures but felt hollow in person. Bright banners hung from the rafters outside. Community meeting. Mandatory attendance. Mandatory, Sarah muttered. Like they own the county. We stepped out of the truck. The wind cut cold across the parking lot, whipping the banners and slapping loose gravel against our boots. My hands tightened around the folder of maps and documents, evidence that could unravel everything Bethany Reed had constructed while I lay unconscious. Inside, the room buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Homeowners filled the rows, retirees in fleece jackets, young families with tense expressions, neighbors who used to wave when I drove by. Now they eyed me with uncertainty. I didn't blame them. They'd been fed a story. At the front of the room, under the bright glow of a chandelier far too fancy for a mountain HOA, stood Bethany Reed. Immaculate navy blazer, perfect hair twist, the same polished veneer she always wore like armor. Her eyes landed on me. Something flickered, annoyance, recognition, fear, but it vanished behind her smile. Mr. Cole, she said smoothly into the microphone, this is a private meeting for Pine Ridge residents. I walked down the center aisle. You built a beach on my land, Bethany. I think I qualify. Gasps rippled across the room. Sarah followed close behind, calm as a still lake. Bethany recovered quickly. You're trespassing again. No, Sarah said, stepping beside me, her voice cool and cutting. We're here under legal authority. This pertains to Mr. Cole's property and multiple potential violations under state environmental code. She handed the meeting coordinator, an HOA board member with trembling hands, a sealed notice. This is official, she added. The coordinator swallowed hard, looked between us, then stepped aside. Bethany's jaw tightened. You can't just walk in here and... But another board member leaned toward her, whispering urgently. His eyes darted toward Sarah's badge, then toward the envelope. He looked scared. Good, I thought. Someone here still had sense. Bethany straightened, lips thinning. Fine. You may observe, but this meeting will continue as planned. She turned back to the crowd. As I was saying, the Willow Point Beach project, that's my lake, I interrupted. Her head snapped toward me. Mr. Cole, your status was uncertain. The crowd murmured. Some looked confused, others uneasy. Others, especially the older folks, looked downright angry. Sarah lifted the map binder. Let's clear that up immediately. She flipped it open and set it on the projector. My hydrological maps, signed, dated, state approved, appeared on the large screen behind Bethany. This, she announced, is Lake Cole, formerly registered as Basin 41D per state classification. It is a controlled overflow basin, protected from shoreline alteration unless approved by state hydrology authorities. The room went silent, utterly silent. You built an entire recreational development on protected land, Sarah continued. Without permits, without jurisdiction, without Mr. Cole's consent. People turned on Bethany, slowly at first, then in droves. The rumor mill spun in real time through whispered conversations, exchanged looks, and rising tension. A man in the front row stood. Is that true? Did you know this land was protected? Bethany's composure cracked at the edges. I acted on information provided to me. We believed the property was abandoned. Sarah didn't let her finish. It wasn't abandoned. It was stolen. I stepped forward, voice steady. I didn't disappear. I was in a coma after an accident. A woman gasped. Another covered her mouth with her hand. Bethany's face drained of color. And while I was unconscious, I continued, someone filed a death notice with my name on it. Someone the HOA hired. A man near the back shot up from his chair. Wait, Pierce? You mean the same guy you used for the mailbox renovations last year? Bethany's eyes flashed panic. I had no knowledge of his actions. He must have acted alone. Oh, he didn't act alone, Sarah said, because the structures on Mr. Cole's lake match the construction patterns tied to Pierce's business entity. The room erupted, shock, anger, realization spreading through the space like wildfire. Another board member spoke up, voice trembling. Bethany, did you authorize this? Bethany pointed at him sharply. Don't you dare put this on me. But it was too late. The tide had turned. Then, from the corner of the room, came a voice I recognized. The sheriff, Marcus Hale. He walked in quietly, hat tucked under his arm, expression somber. He stepped forward. We received word from the state this morning, he said. An emergency environmental review has been approved. Effective immediately, all HOA activity on Willow Point is suspended. Bethany froze. Suspended? You can't. It's already done, Marcus replied. State inspectors will be on site within 48 hours. She looked ready to snap the microphone in half. This is madness. This is my community. I built this place. You built it on someone else's land, I said. Thunder rolled outside, sharp, deep, and perfectly timed, rattling the windows and casting a tremble through the chandelier. Bethany's shoulders sagged. The arrogance drained from her features like someone pulled the plug. The room grew so quiet that even the wind pressing against the building sounded like breath. No one defended her. No one stood beside her. No one looked at her with trust anymore. Whatever empire she'd built here was cracking, and the cracks were spreading fast. I lifted the binder of maps, closed it, and tucked it beneath my arm. The weight didn't feel heavy this time. It felt right. Sarah nodded at me, the hint of a knowing smile touching her lips. The storm outside finally broke, rain hammering against the roof. The sound filled the room like nature itself was pounding its approval. The meeting had gone quiet, just like the lake would soon again. We left the Pine Ridge Lodge to the sound of voices rising behind us, homeowners demanding answers, board members scrambling to distance themselves, and Bethany Reed shouting above them all, her words dissolving into the roar of rain. By the time we stepped outside, the storm had swallowed the valley. Sheets of rain sliced down, drumming on the hood of my truck, turning the gravel parking lot into a shallow, flowing creek. The wind whipped sideways, bending the pines at the edge of the lot in hard bows. Sarah climbed into the passenger seat, shaking water from her hair. We're close, she said quietly, buckling her seatbelt. But they still have one card left. I started the engine. Which is? The stewardship claim. Until it's formally invalidated, the HOA can stall the state, slow walk compliance, even challenge the suspension. We need the deed. In court. Today. A slow heat built in my chest. The deed. My deed. The one I hadn't seen since before the accident. "Let's finish this," I said. The courthouse was only a few miles away, but the storm turned the drive into a crawl. Water rushed along the ditches, swelling toward the road. Thunder rolled across the ridge, echoing through the valley like a drum announcing something inevitable. Inside the courthouse, the air was warmer, almost still compared to the storm outside. The hall smelled faintly of paper, dust, and pine polish, clean enough to feel official, old enough to feel forgotten. The hearing room was already set up when we entered. A judge sat at the raised bench, pen in hand, expression unreadable. Two clerks arranged stacks of papers at his side. Marcus Hale stood near the back wall, hat tucked under his arm, boots dripping rainwater onto the mat. On the opposite side of the room stood Bethany, her blazer damp at the shoulders, her expression stretched thin. She looked smaller than she had at the meeting, like the sharp edges of her confidence had finally dulled. When she saw me, her lips tightened into a faint, brittle smile. "You don't belong here," she said under her breath. I didn't respond. Sarah didn't even glance at her. The judge cleared his throat. "Let's begin." It started calmly, almost quietly. Procedure, filings, introductions. Words meant to frame the conflict in tidy boxes, but nothing about this conflict was tidy. Sarah opened our folder and handed over the first document, the hydrological maps with my signature. "These maps," she said, projecting her voice just enough for the room to carry it, "are certified by the State Water Authority. They designate Lake Cole as a controlled basin outside HOA jurisdiction. No alterations may be made without express state approval." The judge studied the papers through narrow glasses. A faint frown creased his brow. Bethany's attorney, a thinner man whose glasses kept slipping down his nose, stood. "Your Honor, the HOA was under the belief that the parcel had been abandoned. Community stewardship protocols," Sarah stepped forward. "There was no abandonment. There was an accident. Hospital records confirm Mr. Cole was alive and under continuous care during the alleged abandonment period." She placed those records on the table next. The judge reviewed them with slow, deliberate movements. Bethany looked away. Then came the affidavit, the forged death report, the signature from D. Pierce. The judge stopped. His gaze sharpened. "Mr. Cole," he said, leaning slightly forward, "you did not authorize this filing?" "No, Your Honor. I was unconscious. Someone filed me deceased while I was still fighting to wake up." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the clerks exchanged looks. Bethany swallowed visibly. She whispered something harsh to her attorney, but he raised a hand slightly, warning her to stay quiet. Sarah continued. "And while he was unconscious, the HOA contracted the same individual, Mr. Pierce, to construct recreational facilities on Mr. Cole's lake. Facilities that required demolition of natural shoreline, use of heavy machinery, and regrading of protected land." She slid photos forward. My shoreline torn apart, sand piled where cattails once grew, the gazebo, the docks. "None of this was authorized," Sarah said. "None of this was legal." Rain slammed against the window at that exact moment, like nature itself was underlining her words. Bethany's attorney rose again. "Your Honor, it is possible the HOA acted based on misinformation. They cannot be held liable for—" "Stop," the judge said calmly, without raising his voice. "Misinformation does not build docks. Misinformation does not pour concrete. Misinformation does not file death notices." He turned his gaze toward Bethany. She stiffened. "Ms. Reed," he said, "did you authorize construction on this land?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She searched the room for support. Board members, homeowners, anyone. But all she found were turned faces and silent stares. I Followed the documents we had at the time, she said finally, though her voice trembled. And the death filing? The judge pressed. I didn't know, she whispered. Sarah stepped forward and placed the final document on the judge's bench. The deed. My deed. Filed 20 years ago. The judge lifted it as though it weighed more than paper. He looked at the seal, the signatures, the coordinates. Then he looked at me. Mr. Cole, he said, this establishes you as the sole legal owner of the lake, shoreline, and accompanying structures. Bethany closed her eyes. Her attorney exhaled sharply. Marcus shifted his boots. The judge placed the deed back on the table with a soft but decisive thud. It echoed across the room like the closing of a heavy wooden door. In light of this, he continued, the stewardship claim filed by Pine Ridge HOA is hereby invalidated. All structural additions made to Lake Cole are deemed unauthorized and must be dismantled, effective immediately. Gasps spread across the room. The judge wasn't finished. And given the evidence of falsified filings, unlawful construction, and misrepresentation, a full investigation into the actions of the Pine Ridge HOA and its leadership is ordered. Bethany swayed slightly, gripping the back of her chair. Her polished confidence had finally shattered. The judge leaned back. This hearing is concluded. His gavel struck the block with a sharp, echoing crack. And just like that, the theft of my land, my lake, had been reversed. Not with shouting, not with threats, not with force, with truth, with paper, with a deed that never stopped being mine. I turned to leave the courtroom. Sarah gathered the documents, her expression steady but proud. Marcus nodded at me, a quiet sign of respect from a man who'd seen too many fights end badly. Outside, the storm had begun to ease. The rain softened into a steady drizzle, the sky lifting where the clouds thinned. It wasn't over yet. Restoring the land would take work. Undoing the damage would take time. But the lake was mine again, by law, by right, by truth. And tomorrow, the world would see it returned to what it was always meant to be, quiet, untouched, and free from the grip of those who tried to claim it. The next morning began not with rain, not with thunder, but with a soft mist rolling across the valley, thin, silver, gentle. A kind of peace I hadn't felt in nearly 2 years. The storm had washed the air clean, and now the land seemed to breathe easier, as if the soil itself recognized the shift. I drove back up the long gravel road to my ranch, the one that had been marked public access just days earlier. The metal gate, Pine Ridge HOA's claim to ownership, still stood across the entrance, but now it hung crooked, the badge reader dark and lifeless. Sometime during the night, county contractors had shut the power off and chalked a bright orange X across the post. I got out of the truck and stepped into the soft mud, boots sinking slightly. In the cool morning stillness, the only sound was the drip of water falling from pine branches overhead. With both hands, I grasped the top bar of the gate. Cold metal met my palms. I pushed. The hinges screeched and gave way, swinging open with an almost reluctant groan. For the first time in 15 months, I walked onto my land without anyone telling me I didn't belong. Sarah pulled up behind me, climbing out with her satchel tucked under one arm. She fell into step beside me as I made my way down the path. The ground felt familiar under my boots. The slight rise where the soil had settled, the curve where deer often crossed at dusk, the scent of wet cedar lingering in the air. When we reached the shoreline, she stopped. Her breath hitched softly. I knew why. Even in its damaged state, Lake Cole was beautiful. Mist hovered a few inches above the water, drifting in pale ribbons. The surface was still, so still it looked like a sheet of brushed steel, reflecting the gray morning sky. Somewhere across the water, a loon cried out, its call echoing off the ridge. But where there should have been wild grass and cattails, there were piles of broken wood and dismantled platforms. County crews had already started their work. The rental hut was gone, reduced to neat stacks of lumber waiting to be hauled off. The kayaks were loaded into a contractor truck. The once gaudy beach umbrellas lay in a heap, metal twisted from being uprooted. And near the far edge of the water, the gazebo that had been set on fire, the one built on lies and arrogance, was almost entirely removed, leaving only a charred square in the mud. I breathed out slowly. It wasn't the lake I remembered, not yet. But it was on its way back. Marcus Hale approached from the south trail, clipboard in hand. "Morning, Remy," he said, tipping his hat. "Thought you'd be here early." "I couldn't stay away," I replied. He nodded once. "You should see this." He handed me a work order from the State Environmental Office. Signed, stamped, final. HOA structures fully condemned, it read. Full restoration authorized under owner supervision. Owner. Not steward. Not temporary custodian. Owner. It hit deeper than I expected. Across the clearing, a group of contractors worked in steady rhythm. Heavy gloves, bright safety vests, steel-toe boots splashing in the shallow water as they pulled up the last of the decking. Sawdust hung faint in the air when the wind shifted. One worker, a tall man with a beard and a kind smile, caught my eye. "You the owner?" he called across the water. "I am." "Well," he said, leaning on his pry bar, "this is a nice piece of land. A shame what they did to it. But don't worry. We'll make it right." I nodded. "Thank you." Sarah stepped up beside me. "It'll take months," she said softly, almost like a warning. I shook my head. "So did healing. This land deserves the same patience." She smiled gently. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." I didn't answer right away. My eyes had caught something half buried near the old gazebo foundation, a bronze glint under a layer of ash. I walked over, knelt, and brushed the soot aside. The plaque. The one they'd bolted to the railing. This natural lake was generously donated by the late Remy Cole. My jaw tightened, but not with rage this time. There was no heat left in it, only a cool, settled knowing. This was the last lie they had tried to carve into my land. I lifted the plaque, heavy, cold, absurd in its arrogance, and carried it back toward the center of the clearing. The workers paused when they saw it. Marcus crossed his arms. Sarah watched quietly, hands folded in front of her. I set the plaque down on a flat stone, took a sledgehammer from a nearby toolbox, and planted my feet. The weight of the tool felt familiar, far more familiar than hospital beds or forged papers or courtroom benches. I lifted the hammer, brought it down. The bronze cracked, folding in on itself. Another strike, and another. Each hit sent vibrations up my arms, through my shoulders, into my chest, breaking not just metal, but every false word, every stolen moment, every quiet betrayal I'd lived through. When the plaque was no more than twisted scraps, I stepped back. Not angry, not triumphant, just steady. The lake lay quiet behind me. A slow breeze drifted across the water, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. A few ripples touched the shoreline where the cattails were already starting to peek through, stubborn as ever. Sarah walked to my side. "What now?" I took a long breath, letting the wind fill my lungs, letting the stillness settle inside me. "Now," I said, "I rebuild." Later that afternoon, when the contractors had packed up and the last truck rumbled down the gravel road, I carved a new sign from a thick cedar slab I had stored in my shed years ago. The wood was smooth beneath my plane, its golden grain catching the sunlight. The scent, fresh, warm, resinous, filled the air. When I finished, I carried the sign to the spot where the metal HOA gate once stood. I set it deep into the ground, soil crumbling around the base. The letters gleamed in the fading light. Private land, no HOA. And below that, carved a little deeper, with a touch of wry truth only time could sharpen. If you fake my death again, I start charging rent. R. Cole. When I stepped back, it felt right. Like the land finally recognized its owner. As the last light slipped across the water and the mist rose once more, calm and unbroken, I sat on the old stump by the shore. For the first time since waking from that coma, I felt fully alive again. The lake was quiet. The land was safe. And the truth, my truth, had found its way home. If you've ever had to fight for what's yours, drop a simple justice in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Out here, standing your ground isn't about anger. It's about dignity and the quiet promise that truth still matters. And if you want more stories like this, feel free to subscribe and stick around. We've got plenty more miles of road to ride together.